Hello everybody and welcome back to Talking Behaviour, where we are Charlie and
James, hello.
we are talking about behaviour, and we are going to specifically be talking about what we call the ABCs of behaviour today, which is the antecedent behaviour consequence model of operant behaviour. We talked a little bit about it last time.
We did.
James, how are you doing today?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Basically, I've got three different things to talk about today, as usual. We talked about operant behaviour last time, and what I wanted to do is I want to talk about what we call the antecedent conditions. That's the A in the ABC. Then I wanted to talk about motivation, right? Because this is something which I mentioned last time. It's kind of the thing that comes before this model. It's the thing that informs why somebody might act in a specific way, right? Because we've already done behaviour as the previous topic, I don't feel like we need to spend another 10 minutes going over that immediately, but we will potentially come back to each of those as a sub-thing later. Finally, we're going to go on consequences and the effect on behaviour, because that is effectively what consequences do, is they change the future rate of behaviour in similar circumstances. Yeah, I suppose I shouldn't be feeding you information at the beginning, otherwise you'll start the score slightly higher. So, James, on an antecedent, right? What is your understanding of that, and what would be the score that you would give it?
Very little. We obviously touched on it last time, but overall I don't know overly much about it. We'll go with a 2.
We'll go with 2. That's not too bad. All right. 2 out of 10.
Is that the pun? Not too bad?
Not too bad. 3 bad. 4 bad. 1 bad.
1 is bad.
1 bad. 0 bad. Alright, so second thing that we have is motivation and what I called motivating operations. Have you got any idea what either of those two things are about?
No.
Okay, and what would your score be?
Well, 1, I guess. Is 1 the lowest?
0.
0? Then we'll go with a 0.
No worries, 0 out of 10. 0 flaw. Alright, so then what we've got is, the final one is consequences and their effect on behaviour. I suppose I talked to you about this one the most, so probably you have a little bit of understanding, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. We'll go with a 3.
3 out of 10. Alright, lovely. So we've got a 2, a 0, and a 3. That's a pretty good place to be starting from, because that means that we can talk about a lot. So, let's go on to the first one, which is antecedent conditions. Because you had a 2 out of 10, do you want to give us what you kind of retained about that from the last time we talked?
No, I don't.
No, you don't. Okay. To be fair, that's understandable. Hearing it a few times will probably help you being able to put it into words better. So, the word antecedent, right, it's a kind of Latin composite word, right? And ante means before, and cedent is like event, right? So the event before would be the direct translation, right? Antecedent conditions are how the environment is arranged before a behavior occurs that basically a person experiences that their senses are able to interact with. Okay?
Yeah.
So these antecedent conditions, what they do is they show you what is available inside of your environment. Right? If you remember from last time, the environment and the organism are basically the two things that are interacting with each other, and the organism is trying to get stuff out of the environment with their behaviour. Right? Yeah. We talked about that a little bit. What the antecedent conditions do is they highlight what reinforcement is available in the environment based on your understanding of it, right? A lot of this is informed by, your skills teaching previously. An example I would give would be something like if you were never taught to get water from a tap, it was always brought to you in a cup or something like that. You might not actually know that a tap is a place to get water.
Right.
I'm just going to take a sip of water before continuing. Thank you for your patience. So what this basically means is that when you have an environment, you learn how you get things out of it using your behaviour. You try and you error, or you try and you succeed, and this kind of gives you your information about whether something is really available or not, or just appears to be available from previous knowledge, right? Okay. So antecedent conditions, you might think about it as partially about just the environment, but you might also think about it as what has happened to the organism or the person in the previous time before the behavior occurred, because this would also inform what would happen, right? If you think about the behavioral stuff we talked about before, we talked about a thing called setting events, right? Things that set the stage for behavior to be more likely to occur if an antecedent is actually encountered. And these are also an effect beforehand that increases the chance of the behaviour occurring. And what they do is they affect how much you want the things in the environment. right?
Yeah.
So the environment and its arrangement is basically what's available inside of the environment. Your motivation is changed by what has happened to you previously. Yeah, this might be you had a traffic jam, which made you kind of more likely to not want to have to wait even more for things. This might mean that you hadn't eaten breakfast and so you're hungry and then more likely to be going and seeking food. All of these are antecedent conditions, which mean when something is encountered in the environment, you are more likely to go and get it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have any questions about what I've said so far?
No, I don't think so. I think that all makes sense. I would say, could you perhaps give some more examples that would separate that to sort of distinguish that a little bit away from the sort of stuff we talked about last time with the settings being what makes an antecedent condition so different to.
So the reason that it's different is that it's associated with the environment rather than being associated with the organism, if you think about it. The antecedent conditions are partially to do with the person, but mostly what they're to do with is how the person is experiencing the environment, right? We talked a little bit about what's called saliency before. Do you remember that?
I can remember, yeah, but
Okay, so the saliency is the obviousness of something, right?
Right.
And if something is salient and obvious, it is more likely to affect an organism, right? If you aren't able to notice that something is available, even though it is available, you will not behave to get it, right? So what this basically means is you look at the environmental conditions before and you go, the person's behavior is likely based on the antecedent conditions beforehand, right? So it's not really about the person, I guess. The motivation is more about the person, and I suppose we'll get to that on part 2. The conditions are more the environment, the setting, we would say, and how it's presenting potential reinforcement. You know, things that a person might want or have learned that they need, or how it might be teaching you that you want to avoid something in the environment.
Right.
Right. So if you're thinking about it, we talked before about respondent conditioning might teach you why you don't like a teacher, right?
Yeah.
This basically means that when you have that process of classical conditioning, I didn't really mention the word last time, but we call it classical conditioning, the Pavlov's dog situation. What you get is, because the person has a learning history with that individual, that teacher, now that teacher, as part of the environment, acts as a signal, right, that certain things are going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so in the circumstance where you're looking at the behavior of the client, student, trainee, right, you basically go, the antecedent conditions, you want to write as much detail about the things around the person, right, before the behavior occurred, because if you start finding commonalities between
Then
those
they
things,
are your antecedents.
you have a pattern of behavior. You have a pattern of conditions, which leads to a pattern of behavior, which probably you then follow up by looking at the consequences.
Yeah.
Right. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes, I think it does. I think it does. And we may be coming onto this when we talk about, well, potentially either of them. But how do you, once you've found the antecedent, how can you then go around changing it?
So the things that you want to look at are how a person is able to tolerate the things that they're trying to avoid, right? And normally this is the positive negative thing that we talked about with behavior, right? There is both something positive happening, you're trying to gain access to something. There's both something negative happening, you're trying to avoid something, like gain access to game, avoid boredom, right? That was the example that we used before. In this particular circumstance, sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, so I was saying, basically how you found this antecedent behavior.
Right.
You've looked at the list of things that are similar. You've found the condition that is the pattern.
100%. So normally then what you're looking at is how can we teach the person that the behavior that they were showing in those conditions is insufficient to gain access to the thing that they wanted, right?
Okay.
So we're trying to kind of like blunt the force of the bad behavior, or the not bad behavior, but antisocial behavior, the one which might not work in that particular context.
Yeah.
Most behaviors have a context in which they work, right? Even things like extreme examples like pulling your trousers down, you need to do that before you go to the toilet. There's a reason that it's overgeneralized to happen inside of the community setting, right? And normally it might be that you find that the person doesn't understand that there's a difference between the community setting and the home setting, that they are allowed to do it at home but they're not allowed to do it in the community, and that teaching them that actually allows them to discriminate between those two environments and produce the behavior in the right environment. Now, that doesn't always work if a routine has already built up, right? So you might need to also stop them from pulling their trousers down inside of the community, right? And that's something which is very complicated, because people will want to continue the things that they're used to doing.
Yeah.
And when you stop them without explaining it, or without having an effective procedure for minimizing the chance of escalation, right? You basically distress the individual while you're working with them, and that's not our aim. We really don't want people to be feeling like every time that they try and do something that they feel like they need to do, they are frustrated, right? Instead, what we want to do is we want to explain to them why they are not able to do those things as much as possible outside of the context, so that they are informed in the situation. We want an effective procedure which might interfere with them while they're in the process of engaging in the behavior, but in a way which is not going to frustrate them or not going to cause them to become distressed, right? And this might be something like we provide the opportunity to engage with a reinforcer, right? Something that or a preferred activity rather, that they want to do that interferes with the behavior that we're trying to do, and then transition them away from the context where the behavior was going to occur into a context where it can occur, right? And then allow it to occur inside of that context, right? And that's one type of procedure for one type of thing. And what this basically says is the antecedent conditions determine what is the effective procedure for a behavior, right? Antecedents, we basically use them to determine like function, we would call it. The function of a behavior is what the person is trying to get out of the environment, whether it be escape, access to tangible objects or things, attention, or over understimulation. Those things can all play into different behaviors, and all of them have different appropriate responses, and all of those appropriate responses have to be adapted to the individual. Right? So I suppose that's the best way I would put it. In a behavioral setting, like the one where I was originally trained, right, we started with what were like checkbox behavior data sheets, right? And this would basically have 8 different reasons why somebody might engage in a behavior on the left, a list of the behaviors that that particular person had been assessed to engage in the middle, so you could just quickly tick it or tally it, right? And then on the right, the consequences which were effective at dealing with those 8 different types of situation. You were supposed to, or they were supposed to, because I was just a one-to-one at this point, adjust and make sure that these are specific, right? The consequences are adapted and presented in a way which is very technological, as in easily explained, explained in a way that even someone who is a lay person would understand it, right? That doesn't always happen. Depends upon how much time the person has, how big their caseload is, and it's often assessed by some people to be better to be doing X than nothing, so they do these things. But that's one of the things that you can talk about it, is there's this kind of tactical versus strategic thing going on, right? Where a lot of the time when you have a large caseload, you're thinking tactically, right? And because you're thinking tactically, you aren't doing those big picture decisions, right, which allow you to then not have to think tactically consistently and not, overwork and explode. That's very difficult when you're first learning a job, especially.
Yeah, of course.
So, does that answer questions?
It does, yeah. I've got one more actually,
Sure.
which I'm hoping will be a relatively easy, short answer.
Please.
Antecedent conditions, I presume, can be positive as well.
Correct.
And if they are there, I presume there is efforts made to not change it.
Absolutely correct. So there's basically what we call like a baseline condition, right? This is the condition that somebody is in when they are in a good mood and they are not constantly seeking things from their environment. They've received all of the things that they need, and so because of it, they are content effectively, right? And that changes, the requirement to get that changes depending upon your past history and the day and lots of different stuff. The immediate history being the biggest thing, right? And what you do have is you have a situation where these positive antecedent conditions are not talked about enough, and I think that, thank you very much for bringing my attention to the fact I had not talked about it, because it's just as important to list out the conditions which are required to get somebody into that good state and keep them there, as to set out what to do if things start going wrong.
Yeah. So
Right.
those positive conditions
Mhm.
are then the almost goal that you will then try and change to.
Yeah, they're a starting point, right? They are the initial conditions which are satisfactory to the person, right? And that's a good way of thinking about it, because initial conditions shows you what you need to do. Is you need to find a way to make those conditions more reliable and more accessible, right? If you think about it, it's more about whether there is an appropriate amount of input built into that initial condition, that it's not harmful to them in other ways, right? You need to be able to spend time going outside, going to shops, doing things which are um, varied, right? And if you require so much regularity to be in your baseline condition, right, it's going to be very difficult then to introduce the things that you need to do at the rate you're going to need to introduce them to get the person the skills they need to be an adult, right? And so you have to teach people to not rely on that level of input at the beginning, and that's very difficult. It's through systematic fading of those things, replacing them with things which are less harmful, less time sensitive, or time consumptive, I guess, right? So that's a holistic view of behavior, right? If you think about it, you don't want to just go, well, this is what they require to be happy all the time, and so we're going to stay there all the time. What you go is, actually, is this sufficient for the environment that they're going to be in for the rest of their life? And if it's not, we really have to work at that, because otherwise they're going to be in this room for the rest of their life. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So baseline conditions are very important. They tell you what you should be doing to keep somebody happy, and they also show you what's important to them. You can then potentially prioritize the things which are, really, really important to them, really teach them what things are appropriate and inappropriate. There's a lot of skills teaching, but there's also a lot of dealing with the thing as a behavior in itself, as a trial, right? You both want to make sure that you are maximizing the opportunity for your replacement behavior, the thing that you want them to do to happen, right? But you also want to be minimizing the opportunity for the other behavior to happen and get reinforced. Cool.
Yeah.
Lovely. Any more?
No, that's all you've been very thorough.
Oh, excellent. I love it when I'm thorough. So you started at a 2 out of 10 for this one. What's your thoughts now?
Give me a 4.
Oh, whew!
Give me a 4, man.
Wow, starting on a 2 up. We love
Yeah.
to see it. That's absolutely beautiful. Just remember that because we've got quite a lot of points to earn on this one, this might still end up as a different
It could
percentage.
slightly skew it.
Yeah, I've been watching back on things enough that I actually looked at it and was like, of course, I should. I'm a data person. I should. Anyway, moving on. So the second topic that we had was motivation and motivating operations, and you gave it a 0 out of 10. And considering you did not want to try and explain your 2 out of 10, I'm gonna assume that you don't want to have that one as well.
Yeah. I mean, thinking on it realistically, like motivations, people want why people want what they want, and I guess realistically, just kind of knowing what motivations means. I probably should have started at a 1 because I do know.
I mean,
motivating.
sure, I can change that.
So I think probably change that to a 1 just for me knowing words, just for getting a 1 on an English skill rather than
Yeah.
actual terminology.
That's very normal, though. I think most people start with that and then build out of it. And the fact that you're willing to put forward what you know about it is good, because that shows what to build, right? So motivation is, again, back to being about the organism or the individual primarily, right? Really what it is you as a person are in your environment, and your environment is, as I said, signaling what is available, right? This means that you as an organism then pick what of those things you want the most, right? And then go for that, or decide, I don't want any of the things inside of that environment, and try and get out of it.
Change environments.
Right, exactly. So it depends how strategically you can think. It depends what behaviors you have, and the function of those behaviors for getting you out of situations that you don't like, or getting you situations that you do like, right? Motivation, as I said, tends to have 2 components to it. It tends to have a positive component, which is you're trying to gain access to things, but you're also got a negative component, which is you're trying to get away from things that you don't want, right? And both of those things create a process called reinforcement.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk about reinforcement more when we get to the consequences, because that's really where that process happens. But motivation is what happens before you actually engage in the behavior. Really, you go into the antecedent conditions, you assess what is available, you gain motivation for some of the things that are available or for escape, right? You then engage in behavior, which then either gives you it or doesn't.
Would you say quite often the quote unquote bad behavior
Mhm.
that you experience
Sure.
is caused by clients, no, your
Mhm.
people being able to or not being able to change their environment when they have a lack of positive motivations around them. So they don't have the positive options around them, but they are seemingly unable to change environment, and that then leads to the bad behavior.
I'm gonna just ask that we change it to like antisocial.
Yeah.
Right, because I feel like it's important to understand that all behavior is functional, and it's more that it's inappropriate in a certain context. Right.
Understood.
The thing that I would say is it's more about the fact that this is something to with my clients. I work a lot with people with autism, so I'm going to talk about autism quite a lot with this. Autism very specifically has a routinary fixated interest component to it, right? So you like fulfilling routines, right? And you fixate upon your interests and you are very, very interested in them, right? Which makes it very difficult to gain new interests because comparative to the ones you already have, they're not very motivating.
Yeah.
Right? That's one of the things that is interfering. There's another thing around learning disability, which is the difficulty around skill acquisition. Right? If you have a learning disability, you are going to have slower skill acquisition. It's within the diagnostic criteria. And because of this, it's more difficult to learn behaviors. You learn less behaviors, you have less context that you can get out of, right? Just mathematically speaking. Thirdly, this is a spiraling situation, right? If you are in a situation where someone has an extreme enough reaction that they can control behavior quite well, this can basically lead to someone being presented with less options. Because they're presented with less options, they use the behavior more whenever options are presented, which shrinks their world down until they're only presented with the things that they want the most, and now they are stuck in a room. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a situation as it is. It's more along the lines of, because of the fact that there is not always this understanding about why somebody is doing the behavior, because the behavior can actually look quite counterintuitive to what the person is actually trying to get out of the situation, right? People will not always get a logical understanding of this person is doing it for that reason, right? And so it and they won't always know that the good decision they're doing in the short term will have this long term consequence if they don't account for it, right? In other ways, especially because there's such this complexity element to the population that I work with. I work with complex needs, people with intense behaviours of concern, right? And this basically means that the level of intensity of the behaviour of the people that I'm often dealing with can mean it's not an option to present certain options, right? At least until you've basically gotten them all the steps upwards necessary to make sure it's successful, right? And that's the complication. Is really it's more about what is required to get this person to successfully get through this process with the things that we want. And sometimes the level of technical knowledge required to do that is extreme,
Yeah.
and practical application, of course. Okay, so motivation has this unit to it, right? Which is a motivating operation. This is basically what we would say happens to somebody when they become aware that something is in an environment that they either like or dislike, right? They go in to the environment, they get a motivating operation of one of two types. What's called an establishing operation, the establishment that you want something, or a abolishing operation, the abolishment of the want, right? And this might be you go into a situation and you're engaging with a toy or a sensory item, and you have an establishing operation to engage with that first, right? But as you engage with it, your motivation changes. The more that you engage with something, the more satiated, right, you become, and the more that your motivation dips and you're less interested in it. Then what happens is something else becomes evident to you in that environment, and its level of establishment overtakes the sensory toy. Now you have an abolishing operation for the sensory toy, get rid of it, and an establishing operation for the new thing. You want to get access to it, right? This causes a transition, right? Which is a behavior, right? You stand up, you walk over, you get the other object, and you start engaging with it. And that whole thing is reinforced by actually getting to engage with the other item. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So establishing operation, abolishing operation. This can also be someone walks into a room that you don't like and you immediately get out, I don't want to be in this room anymore. Abolishing operation for everything inside of that room. It's not worth being there anymore.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Right. And it's really good to think about it in that kind of positive, negative kind of way, because you wouldn't be running away from something if there wasn't a better option available, right? Or you would be trying to get rid of the thing and stay in your environment. And that is what happens a lot of the time, is if you completely cut off all of the options, right? You go, okay, so this person wants to get rid of this teacher, but they can't leave because they're in a school, right? And the teacher's not allowed to leave because that would be giving in, or, you know, whatever they're going to call it, right? That's a problem. Because now what you've done is you've basically given them no option except for get rid of the teacher.
Yeah.
Right? And the level of intensity of the behavior will be determined by their learning history. And if they have a very, very high threshold of intensity, it could happen immediately. Right.
Okay.
And this is something that people don't realize, is you have a repertoire of behaviors. You have things that you have done before which have been effective in one circumstance or another. And the only reason you stop doing them is you either get another behavior which is effective at doing that thing, right? Or that becomes ineffective and then you choose something else or you try something else. And that's really complex.
Yeah. So going off that teacher example,
Mm-hmm.
would a method of trying to help with that be to introduce a new stimulus that was a positive that they could focus on,
Mm-hmm.
that outweighed the negatives of
Yes.
removing that teacher? And then how do you, because obviously that you can't, I mean, for me, I would say you can't just continuously give more sensory input to somebody to satisfy them.
Correct. So yeah, you're right. And it's more about what you would be doing with that process, right? Is it that you're trying to just interfere with the thing that they were going to do, which was basically aggress towards the teacher to get rid of them? At which point, the aim for that is to increase the duration that the teacher's able to be inside of the room, right? And as long as it's
Getting
increasing,
used to it.
right? Yeah. And what you're doing is you're also doing the classical conditioning process, right? You're doing Pavlov's dog there. You're co-presenting the teacher with a positively correlated stimulus, like something that the person likes, and the teacher should become conditioned to produce positive responses, or their negative response at the very least should slowly start ticking up until it gets to neutral. And then if they keep doing it, it will go up. So when you are working with a student in an ABA setting, they do what they call stimulus-stimulus pairing, right? Or they do a pairing procedure with their tutors, right? When you first start working with a person, you present the things that they want at a high rate, frequency, and intensity for a 10 to 15-minute session, right? You make it more fun by you being there, you engage with the person, and you build the relationship before you introduce any teaching materials.
Yeah.
What that does is it immediately correlates you with all this positive stuff and allows you to then slowly and systematically introduce all the neutral teaching materials that you've prepared and correlate them with your presence.
Yeah.
Right? This allows the teaching materials to actually become positive. This makes the person more interested in actually learning and makes all of these things kind of tie into each other in like a reinforcement cycle. Right? And then if they have a breakdown, if there is a crisis situation and someone has a really bad day, you should be pairing during recovery. Right? While the person has been in crisis, you've just had to keep them safe, do everything that you've needed to do to kind of make sure that the environment is safe as well, that the person's in a good condition at the end of it, you know. But then afterwards, that person's going to have been frustrated somehow because they were in crisis. It's difficult to not to give someone everything that they want in crisis and not have it just continue. Right? Because what that does is it provides a reinforcer during a very difficult situation, which encourages the situation to continue. Right. So you have to just neutrally and, you know, lovingly just respond and try and keep the person safe, keep them from doing anything dangerous, keep them going. And when they're calm, provide them with all the things that they want so that encourages them to stay in the good situation. You then, if you've had any kind of negative reaction with that client, you're going to need to repair with them. Right, you're going to need to go in, you're going to need to present all of your reinforcers again, you're going to need to rebuild that relationship before you try and do anything else. Otherwise, they'll just try and get rid of you. Does that explain the situation?
Does, yeah.
Lovely. So it kind of shows you how all of these processes are used in practice, right?
Yeah.
Is that, like, I can talk about Pavlov's dog, I can talk about operant conditioning and the Skinnerian model of behavior, which is from B.F. Skinner, right? and basically go, these are some examples. But the thing that people are probably most interested in is, why is this useful? What do you do it for? And the answer is, we work with complex populations who have really difficult to read situations, and we use these procedures to try and adjust the conditions around them so that they are more likely to succeed. We try and condition the things that they thought were negative but were actually just badly presented in previous settings, right? And make them positive, teach them correctly, effectively, and use really technical procedures to support a population that would not have been teachable in previous generations.
Oh yeah, so interesting.
Want to give it a score out of 10? You had 1 out of 10 that time.
Yeah.
Or do you have any more questions, I suppose?
No, I don't know. I think you've been pretty bang on there. Go to 3.
A 3? We've
Yeah.
gone up 2. Lovely. We've gone up 4 today. That's already good. I feel like that's pretty nice. All right. So, final section. Okay. And this one, I've been referring to it throughout the entire thing, right? Consequences and their effect on behavior. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to not go into the level of detail that I could go on this, because it's very much like a kind of Russian nesting doll situation where we're going to talk about 3 things, and each of those things has like sub things around them.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And we're going to talk about some other the paradigm through which these things are kind of broken down into, because I think it's better to talk about it that way than to go blah, blah, blah at you, right, and have a problem. That's probably going to come up really weird on the thing. Nonetheless, okay, so what we have with consequences is we have the signal from the environment about whether a behavior has been successful or unsuccessful or neutrally responded to. Okay?
Okay.
There is a process called reinforcement, which is the process of a behavior functionally getting what it wants, right? Reinforcer is something that, if the technical definition specifically, is something that occurs after a behavior that causes the behavior to occur at an increased rate, frequency, or intensity or duration in future circumstances, right? And so if it does not create that response of increase of that behavior that it immediately followed, then it's not reinforcement.
Okay.
Right? You can have preferred items, activities, things that someone likes, which are not actually usable as reinforcement in a procedure, and you are expected, when you are a behavioral scientist or someone who is working with people practically, to know what things actually are effective reinforcers and to test this, right, to take data on whether something did increase or not when you presented a particular reinforcer, and use that to change the reinforcement if something is not working.
Okay.
Right. Reinforcement is something which has basically these 2 dimensions to it that explain whether it is about getting something or getting rid of something, right? And whether you are doing it or whether you are using somebody else to do it, okay? So you have this positive reinforcement, which is the addition of something which causes a behavior to occur more in future circumstances. And then you have negative reinforcement, which is the removal of something which causes a behavior to increase in future circumstances. So the key thing about making it a reinforcer is it increases the behavior, not whether you say positive or negative, right? The positive or negative dimension is about whether you added or removed something to increase the behavior.
Right. Okay.
Okay. What this basically means is there are some behaviors which are effective at removing things in the environment that we don't want, and there are some behaviors which are effective at gaining us access to things that we want inside of the environment. Okay. Positive reinforcer, negative reinforcer.
Right? Could you give us some examples?
Okay, so positive reinforcement is generally associated with the functions of attention, right? Gaining access to the attention of other people, gaining access to well, to be fair, there's also a negative version of attention, removing the attention of someone who you don't like, right? Positive, by addition, there's lots of different versions depending upon the person, I suppose is the best way I could say. It's more about, does it increase your access to something that you previously gained access to and wanted to retain, right? In terms of an example, this could be anything from going outside, right, is access to a tangible thing. This could be access to a physical thing or a item which you've got a history of wanting to engage with, like a video game or reading, right? These things are learned behaviors. They're not inherently reinforcing. You didn't start with them right at the beginning, but you've learned that they have value through your previous history, right? Then you have what are primary reinforcers, right? These are the things which you never needed to learn to be able to want them, right? Because they're inherently necessary for your survival or for the survival of our species. Okay?
Yeah.
That makes probably the simplest sense is you have these things which are inherently reinforcing, which are our primary reinforcers, and then you have your secondary reinforcers, which are all the things that we have learned or conditioned to be reinforcing through our previous experience.
Right.
Right? You then have these things in the environment which are called punishers, or there is punishment, which is the opposite version of this, right? Punishment is something which, when presented immediately after a behavior, causes it to occur less in the same circumstances, right?
Yeah.
Punishment also has a positive and a negative component to it, right?
Okay.
Punishment basically goes, a positive punisher would be, for example, physical abuse, right? If someone was to engage in a behavior and then immediately afterwards get hit, that behavior is less likely to occur in future, but it also is likely to absolutely destroy that person's personality, which is why it's not legal to do it, right?
Mm.
The whole thing is punishment is super duper effective, right? But it has a horrifying effect on people, right? And it's why it's literally the last resort in every single circumstance is to use punishment to reduce a behavior, right? It's almost always why I'll be talking about replace the behavior, minimize the reinforcement occurring afterwards, try and maximize the reinforcement occurring after the replacement behavior, avoid using punishment, always avoid punishment, right? Because you get negative effects. You get what's called punishment induced aggression, right? You can guess what that means.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the situation where I talked about before, where I said if you remove all of the opportunities for somebody to get rid of something via their positive behavior, they will engage in behavior which is very dangerous to do the thing that they need, right?
Yeah.
And that is also a problem. Okay, so the negative version of punishment would be removing something that someone likes from an environment to reduce the behavior, right? And this would be like you're not allowed to play video games anymore because you didn't do your homework, right? This is a timeout procedure, right? And it's less impactful than a positive punisher generally.
Yeah.
But it can be extremely impactful still. And for people who are not able to tolerate conditions well, like people with autism, for example, it can be like goes well, explosion, someone has a really, really bad time and now they have a really bad history because you didn't calculate it correctly. So people have thought previously it might be better to be using negative punishment, but no, it still has a bad long-term effect generally. There are some circumstances where it might be recommended, but you have to assess everything on a case-by-case basis, and you need expert input if you're going to be doing anything like that. Someone more than me, for example. I'm not doing it. So, does that make sense?
Yes, it does, yeah.
So positive and negative, that's one of the dimensions. The other one was whether you're doing it, right, or you're getting somebody else to do it. So you have automatic behavior, right? This is behavior which is, automatic reinforcement, not behavior, which is something which you do to gain access to a reinforcer. This could be anything from engaging in self-stimulatory behavior, like scratching your eyebrow. It could be, when you play with your hair and you get that kind of nice tingly feeling. All of that is self-stimulatory. Or it could be opening the window because you were hot, right? You opened the window, you didn't get anybody else to do it. It was mediated by you rather than by a social value, right?
Yeah.
And that basically tells you what the other one is. It's socially mediated reinforcement, which is something like you making a request, right? Can you open the door, or tapping someone on the shoulder to gain access to their attention, or things like even sending a Deliveroo order, right, would be socially mediated because you send it. It's kind of automatic how you engage with the phone, but then you need a person to come and deliver you the food.
Yeah.
Right, and so there is a social component to that as well. It's just a system that's built in to your phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Questions about that?
No.
Okay, so you've got these two primary types of consequence, right? Reinforcement, punishment.
Yeah.
They both have this dimension of positive, negative, socially mediated, automatic, right? So you have these two squares, and those are the primary ways that we experience whether something is successful or unsuccessful, right? There is a third consequence type, and this one it's more complicated. It's more of a grey area in how effective it is because it is extremely effective, but you have to be extremely technical with its use to be able to use it effectively and not cause a problem, right? This is called extinction, right? And the name could be better,
Yeah.
right? But the extinguishing of behavior is the process of removing previously correlated reinforcement from it, right? So the things that your behavior used to get, if you no longer get them, why would you keep doing it?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, this is the one where they use it a lot with kids, right? Because you can control the environment with a kid. You have a lot more control over things. It's more ethical to be telling them what to do, right? Because they have less understanding about how to keep themselves safe a lot of the time. But the general idea is you assess very carefully what the actual reinforcement somebody's getting from a specific behavior is, and you make sure that they don't get it. And the problem is it does have side effects, right? There's a very specific thing called an extinction burst, right? Which is after you input a extinction procedure, you stop reinforcement from contacting that behavior at all, which is very difficult, right? The person will try harder first. That's a problem because they will increase the frequency, they'll increase the duration, they'll increase the intensity, and they might even try something new first. And only when all of that is unsuccessful will it go down.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then once it has been unsuccessful for a long enough period of time, they might test to see if it's still not going to work. And if that is unsuccessful, then the person will probably not engage in that behavior again for a while, at least until there is an obvious opportunity available to them. And you'll note I didn't say it would go away forever.
Yeah.
Right? I said that, it's less likely because you've dealt with it in that particular manner. That's the thing about extinction is it can work, but it needs to be managed appropriately. And again, it's the second best option, right? In fact, it's kind of a third best option. It's just not the worst option. But there's a very famous graph type, which is the extinction curve, right? And it starts like you've got your x and y axis like this. This is great listening, by the way. And it comes out here at where the behavior was starting at. It goes extinction implemented, goes up, and then goes and hits the ground, right? And then it goes do along the ground, goes blip, and there's this thing called a spontaneous retraction or a spontaneous reoccurrence. Sorry, and this is then trying again much later to see whether the conditions are held stable.
Yeah.
Right, and that used to be how people who were behavior analysts dealt with almost all behavior, right? And that was a problem.
Just almost completely like blanking like that.
Well, if it was attention-based behavior, yeah,
Yeah.
they would. They'd completely remove the attention. They might minimize all of the stuff that the person could have a crisis near, and then everybody in the room just completely flat out ignores them until the behavior stops. That's going to have a negative effect on someone.
Yeah.
Right? That's also kind of punishment.
It
Right?
is, yeah. I was
Especially
gonna say.
because it's basically it's not just it's not just no addition of anything from the behavior, it's the removal of the attention that was available in the room as well.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a negative punisher, right? It's not really an extinction procedure. Right? An extinction procedure is you kind of maintain at the level that it was at before. The behavior has absolutely no effect on you, right, whatsoever. And then you go, do this. They do it. You're like, such a good job, man. Well done. And you teach them the correct behavior and you respond to that, right? The thing you don't want to do is accidentally punish by overdoing it, right? Because then you get your punishment-induced aggression. You get all of these really horrible experiences that people have. And then you have a breakdown of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Do our brains work to the point where I guess that I actually think about it, it definitely does. I was going to say where we push too far with a positive or with a reinforcement, sorry, so that it becomes a punishment. So, for example, you give somebody enough sweets, you say give them enough chocolate, and then they feel sick, and then they don't like it anymore.
Yes.
Which, in effect, as the adult version, is I'm going to drink a lot, and then I'm hungover.
Yes. So there are some behaviours which are initially reinforcing and then in the long-term punishment if overdone. That's more about the toxicity of a reinforcer, right? It's more the process I think that you're talking about is the satiation deprivation paradigm, basically, which is absence makes the heart grow fonder is right? The less that you have something that you like, the more that you will want it. And this is also, it's a survival thing. It actually teaches us to maintain our systems, right? The same is true for satiation. The more that you have access to something that you want, the less that you want it. And some things, because of their toxicity, you can go way over the top with them and then they will actually harm you, right? It's one of the reasons that we have a do not use harmful reinforcers thing built into the ethics of the behavior analysis, effectively, right? Satiation and deprivation is a good way of looking at things, right? Because really it also means that you can prep conditions that allow a behaviour to be satiated before you go into a situation that was a problem previously, so that it's less likely to occur in that situation, right? Yeah, does that explain that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so satiation deprivation is good because you can actually think this person needs it, they're just getting it in the wrong context, let's give it in the right context, and then they might not need to do it in this one, right? The problem you might get is normalization of a higher level of something, right? You might go, oh, they're getting this from the community, like they're getting some chocolate from outside, and because of this, there's some stress around people maybe having arguments inside the shops with them because they keep like trying to go back and get the stuff. Maybe if I give them some chocolate beforehand, they won't want the chocolate as much, so it'll be an easier time. However, if they then get the chocolate as well at the shop, you've just normalized getting twice the amount with that person, and now they're going to expect it.
Yeah.
Right? Which means that when you don't give them two, extinction occurs, right? And then the behaviours which have been previously effective at gaining access to that second piece of chocolate will come out.
Right.
Right. This is the classic tantrum in the shop situation, really, which, it's very complicated because it is stressful for parents being in a shop with the child tantruming on the floor. It's hard for them. They're getting a lot of negative attention. People are tittering. My view on it is the people who are tittering don't have any idea about what's going on. Right, especially if it's like a neurodivergent child or someone who's having real difficulty, right? The people who understand that child will make the decisions that they need to make. And if you feel confident in that, I'm sure that you will be able to do what you need to do with those people acting in that manner and still know that you're doing the right thing. It's always just the challenge of people being taught what to do in those situations. They think they're doing the right thing by reinforcing the tantrum with the piece of chocolate because it stops. And do you know what that does?
Reinforces.
Yeah, it reinforces you giving them chocolate. Vicious cycle.
Vicious cycle.
Yeah. Any more questions on that one?
No. No, all good.
No, very good, very good, very good. Well, we started all right on this one. Consequences and their effect on behaviour was 3 out of 10. James, would you like to give me your...
I actually really enjoyed that. I think I've got a lot from that. I think I've got quite a clear picture in my head as well of that sort of, not quite Venn diagram, but that sort of
positive, negative,
the spectrum and how it all sort of interact, and then also the little dot of the extinction, just a little bit separate.
It's very symmetrical the way that I imagine it, and that's almost everything makes sense when you go down to the correct scale.
Yeah.
Right? It's just about whether people have been viewing things at the wrong scale, whether people have been going, grand historical ideas about people, right? Often those are actually a society question, right, rather than a people question.
Yeah.
If you want to look at the individual, you look at the data for the individual. You look at how they compare to their previous performance. You look at a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
Next time, we'll talk about data. And we'll talk about what makes it different than a lot of different things that other scientific disciplines, because it's not really quantitative, qualitative, really. I suppose it's kind of both.
Okay.
But single subject design. Enjoy it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Put me as a 6.
Oh, yeah. That is very important. Cool. So, we should work out our data.
Yeah.
So, we started on 2 out of 10 for antecedent conditions, gave us a potential of 8 points. We started on 1 out of 10 for motivation and motivating operation, which gives us 9. We started on 3 out of 10, which gave us 7 for consequences and their effect on behaviour. That gives us 17, 24. Is the max points that you could have potentially gained.
Mm-hmm.
You then gained 2, 2, 3.
It's pretty good going. I think that might be the most points that I've gained, you know.
You have. Yeah, the most was 4 before, and you just gained 6. No, 7? 2, 2, 3?
7.
7. Yeah. Wow. Okay, 7 over 24, please, James.
7 over 24 times 100. 29.17.
That
1/6 recurring.
is an exceptionally high number for the amount of points that we had to gain.
Yeah.
I'm actually incredibly I'm very, very happy about that. Wow. It's working.
That means if we carry on at this rate, I only need 3 more sessions on that, and I know everything.
Woo! James is also very, very good at doing mental maths, which is one of the reasons why I felt like this was a good option for him to be more than anything. But I'm really happy with this as well. I think this was a very in-depth conversation. I have no idea how long it was.
Neither do I.
But we'll find out, and if I need to cut it up, I will. honestly, thank you so much, everybody. And I just wanted to say thank you for the, I think it's something like 300 potential people who have seen various clips and cuts of the last 2 episodes. Honestly, it's been a great experience and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
See you next time.
See you later.